Good evening and welcome to the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. My name is Courtney Stell and I'm the gallery director here at RMCAD. I am proud to bring you guys tonight the 16th edition of the Visiting Artist, Scholar, and Designer program, believe it or not. The VASD program, as I call it, is an interdisciplinary initiative that fosters vision, creativity, and innovation by bringing leading scholars, designers, and artists to campus. I'd like to introduce now Barrett Soley-Holt, who is the coordinator of the Visiting Artist, Scholar, and Designer program, bringing her third visitor in. So without further ado, Barrett.
Hi. It is with great pleasure that I bring to you tonight the second in RMCAD's VASD Spring 2013 series, Ethics and Practice Approaches to the Contemporary. Tonight we have the opportunity to approach the ethics implemented through discourse brought about by practices of art making with Paddy Johnson's public lecture, The Ethics of Critique. Paddy Johnson began the blog Art Fag City in 2005, bringing a wider scope to art criticism by covering lesser known and emerging artists. Today, Art Fag City, now recently Art of City, is acclaimed as the best art criticism blog by such established publications as The Times and Village Voice, with the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal frequently linking to their content, among others. Paddy Johnson's own work is not only encountered on Art of City, but in New York Magazine, The Guardian, and The Economist, to name a few, and she is also the arts editor for the Elle magazine. So without further ado, I'd like you to join me in welcoming Paddy Johnson.
Hi, everyone. My name is Paddy Johnson. I'm speaking on the ethics of critique. This is a new lecture for me, so I'm a little bit more nervous than I might normally be, so I hope you'll forgive any sort of hiccups in the presentation as we go forward. And I want you all to know that I've set a timer for myself so I don't talk your ear off for an hour. So if it goes off in the middle of the lecture, it's probably a good thing. So those are the disclaimers. And also, just sort of to begin, I did want to thank Barrett and Courtney for inviting me to come and speak today about ethics. I consider it a privilege. Welcome. My name is Paddy Johnson. I am the founder of Art F City, the blog formerly known as Art Fag City. As I explained on the blog during the relaunch, it took a while, but after 8 years of running with this name, I really got tired of being automatically filtered into spam. So this is an attempt to sort of rectify that situation. So if you didn't already know, consider yourselves insiders. You know what the F stands for. And that, by the way, is fan. And I'm not even joking. Art fag is a euphemism for art fan. So when I coined the name, when I came up with the name of the site, I was thinking about New York, which is where Art Fag City is based, and how many art fans there were in the city, and it just seemed that there was no center where there were more art fans than Art Fag City, than New York. So anyway, so that's that. Let's see. Here we are. In any event, Art Fag City began in 2005 as a single-authored blog, so that was just me authoring the whole thing, and it now employs 5 people, so we've grown. When I began, I wrote about art, and the online community was very, very small, and that's not at all the case today. The online world and the art world has grown exponentially, and it's bursting with countless communities and sub-communities, and you know, it's a really exciting place to be in, but it comes with certain responsibilities. And so what I'm going to talk to you about today is the role that critics have in this community, what the ethics of a critic are and should be, and specifically with regards to community participation and management. To begin with, I'm going to show a video that I have to tell you I don't totally agree with. And, you know, that kind of makes sense for me as a critic to do something like this, because now I'm going to point out all the ways in which it's wrong. But it's also, you know, it's a good way for me to stake out my position. And I personally think that any video on Occupy Wall Street is sort of a good entry point for any discussion about ethics and criticism.
This movement isn't about the 99% defeating or toppling the 1%. You know the next chapter of that story, which is that the 99% create a new 1%. That's not what it's about. What we want to create is the more beautiful world our hearts tell us is possible, a sacred world, a world that works for everybody, a world that is healing, a world of peace. You can't just say, we demand a world of peace. Demands have to be specific. Anything that people can articulate can only be articulated within the language of the current political discourse. And that entire political discourse is already too small. And that's why making explicit demands kind of reduces the movement and takes the heart out of it. And so it's a real paradox. And so I think that the movement actually understands that. The system isn't working for the 1% either. You know, if you were a CEO, you would be making the same choices they do. The institutions have their own logic. Life is pretty bleak at the top too. And all of the baubles of the rich, they're kind of this phony compensation for the loss of what's really important. The loss of community, the loss of connection, the loss of intimacy, the loss of meaning.
So anyway, you get the gist of this. We haven't seen much from Occupy Wall Street recently. And, you know, it's a movement that this speaker describes as diminished by specific demands. And, you know, that is also one that is inherently short-lived. And I'm also not one who happens to believe that political discourse is limited by language. I think that discourse in every arena is damaged by corruption and greed. Let's see here. And we see a lot of that, a lot of those problems in the art world, which at least, you know, at the top of the art world, which is richer than ever, you know, they've been plagued by these issues. In addition to all this, I really don't believe that the community that we have is at all lost. You know, we see the internet is filled with communities and sub-communities and all the things I mentioned earlier. And I see, you know, I've spent a lot of time in Denver, and I've been introduced to the Denver community, and I feel like this community is as unique as any I have met and come across. And so really what I do feel is that if we don't fight the problems that you know, unequal distribution of wealth causes, then our community becomes very unhealthy. So for me, ethics and criticism is defined by advocating for better communities within our respective fields. In short, a good critic is also a good activist. And so in this presentation, I'm going to go over what ethics, activism, criticism mean both to the world of art and the world outside it. So I'm going to begin with a story that I don't like very much. And hopefully I'll be able to deliver something a little bit more uplifting by the end of the presentation. But it begins with Sotheby's. And they, I don't know if you guys followed this story much last year, but they, in the summer of last year, had locked out their art handlers. There were 43 of them, and this happened after labor negotiations went south. And that was something that I did not like for a number of reasons. Basically, the Sotheby's was making record profits at the time and continues to do so. So, you know, I think in terms of making an argument that, like, you know, look, we all have to suffer because we've all suffered these, you know, cuts in profits, was not something that really could have was not an argument that could be made in this case. And I think that it's really important that when we, you know, are creating workplace environments, that we try and treat the people that we work with, you know, no matter where they are, with the respect and compensation that they deserve. And I also think that, you know, what they were proposing in this as a replacement, I think, in their proposal was that long-term positions will be replaced by temporary workers. And I have a problem with that for a number of reasons. I have a problem with that, number one, because I think long-term relationships are simply better for the art. I think it's better for the people who are handling the art, getting to know the art, and it's also better for, you know, employee relationships. And I think, and it's better for keeping the art safe. There's a lot of things that I think make this, you can, a lot of arguments, and there are a lot of arguments against sort of employing temporary art workers, and I think that they're not that hard to make because the more time we spend with art, the more valuable it is to us. And I think it's important that we respect that. And third of all, I think, for me anyway, one of the big problems with this was that, you know, just sort of in a general sense, was that as an art community, you know, we tend to hold relatively liberal positions. But I find that, you know, fairly high up, those liberal positions don't mean anything as related to a bottom line. And so the kind of rhetoric that we maintain is not necessarily one that we act on. So I felt that this would be not only, you know, I think within the scope of a larger movement that's, you know, seeking to dismantle unions across the country, but, you know, within the art community sets a very poor example for how we want to treat each other. So I have a video that I'm going to show that I don't like.
$1 in profit, and you have locked us and our families out on the street. We want to know, what do you have against working families and working New Yorkers? We want to know when you're going to do the right thing. That's David Martinez, by the way. That's what we want to know. Can you answer us that? That's what we came down here today to find out.
You have a motion before the board.
We have a question about our families and what are you going to do to take care of our families? You are on the board of Sotheby's. Are you on the board of Sotheby's? Are you going to ignore what's happening to our families in your name? Are you going to ignore what's happening? Mrs. Taylor, you have the power to do the right thing. Will you please tell us why you're not doing the right thing?
You get in the lockout.
Tell us why you're not doing the right thing.
We'd like to know.
Will you please speak to us? We have families that are going to lose our health care here. We want to go back to work. We're hard-working New Yorkers. We're respectful people. We want our jobs back.
We don't want to interrupt your meeting.
Why will you not?
Good work, but you made us come down here 4 months on the street. We don't like that.
I have one thing to say to you. I've had one conversation with Bill Ruprecht about this, and I told him that if he exceeds to any of your demands, I will resign from the board. That's all I have to say.
Well, it sounds like you might have to resign from the board.
So none of that is very good. If you're wondering, that woman, by the way, is Mayor Bloomberg's wife. So that also gave us a sense of, you know, what Mayor well, at least it gave me a better kind of understanding of Mayor Bloomberg's philanthropy programs and sort of how he felt about different classes in the city. Anyway, one of the things that we, let me see. Oh, good. I've already switched. So there was not enough support, I think, within the art community that I felt anyway for the Sotheby's art handlers. So we spent an enormous amount of time covering this. This is one of the many posts we wrote in which, just to give a little bit of context, in May, the Frieze Art Fair hosted a discussion called Expanding Museums. And Glenn Lowry, the director of MoMA, Adam Weinberg, the director of the Whitney, spoke about the various museums that they had under construction. So even to begin with, I kind of took issue with the title Expanding Museum, and I think there was a lot of description underneath about all the things that they weren't going to talk about. What they did talk about was, their projects of various building projects. So when this happened, we were at this discussion. So one of my colleagues stood up and asked the people on the panel discussion, well, what do you think about the Sotheby's art handler protest? Because the thing is that the MoMA, Whitney, like a statement from any of these major museums would have made a major difference in that battle. It would have swung a lot of weight. And what happened was that Glenn Lowry and Adam Weinberg both pretended not to know anything about the protests. So I thought that this was terrible. Sheena Wagstaff, who was also there, she's the chairman of the Modern and Contemporary Art Museum at the Met, just remained silent. And finally, after some context was given, the Whitney director finally said that they had no intention of responding one way or the other. And then, of course, as you see here, the reason for that is that they were going to do some work with Sotheby's in the fall, which, I think all of these things in the course of business are kind of normal. You choose an auction house to work with. They probably have people on the board that are from Sotheby's. We have like a map somewhere on the site that charts out all the people on the board and what boards, like on the MoMA and the Whitney board, and like what boards they're also on, with the auction house. These things are kind of normal, but the issue is that if people aren't being treated properly, you do have some power. You can say like, hey, look, I'm going to take this to another auction house like Christie's, which does exactly the same thing, only better a lot of the time, and use them as a platform. But instead, we found that nobody wanted to do that. And even Artifact City is a nonprofit, or is transitioning to one. And I've been in the process now of auditioning various people for the board. And it seemed to me that the richer the people were who I was talking to and the more connected they were to the art world, the less interested they were in the kind of work that I wanted to do. And that's a little depressing, because they were very concerned about their own connections. And that's the way the art world works. But I have never, for better or for worse, often, unfortunately, for worse, I've never run my blog that way. And I just never could. And that sometimes is hard, but I think it's important to understand what you want to give to the community and what you want to get out. So we wrote a petition. And that is something that I think an art blog without a kind of, that might have been a for-profit art blog or a blog without sort of an independent spirit would not be able to do. And what we said in this was that it was a call, basically. And we said, if you're an artist, you can tell Sotheby's you don't support the sale of your work. And that seemed fairly easy. If you're a collector, you can buy and sell from other auctions whenever possible. If you're in the media, you can use a platform to assure that all voices are heard, not just Sotheby's art handlers, but even the people that I consider not so nice. So, as it turned out, the people who I considered not so nice didn't really have that much interest in talking to us, but the doors were open. So, and we got a lot of people to sign that petition, and we closed the petition with the following line: whoever you are, you can sign this petition and show Sotheby's where you stand, then forward it to everyone you know. You can make the art world you want to participate in a place where people matter and no one can be casually cast aside. And I think that was something that was very important for me to do. And we got Heinz Steinbach to sign the petition. We got Anton Vidokal and Coco Fusco. But ultimately, we only had 2,700 signatures, and it went out on eFlux. It went out on RPEG City. I flacked this to anybody who would listen. And, I think when I look back at the petition, I think, oh, I could have done a better job. Like, I could have sent it to more of my friends. I could have sent out something that said, if you send this to 10 people, we'll have 20,000 signatures. But I still think that I probably shouldn't have had to have done that, given, from my perspective, the clarity of the issues at stake. And so, anyway, the end of this story, which is, in my opinion, not entirely positive, but okay, was that the art handlers, in the end, they got wind of the original contract that they had been offered that they were fighting against was going to expire. So Sotheby's was going to offer them a new one. They got wind through rumor or something that the second offer that they were going to get was going to make sure that all of them were totally out of a job. So rather than just going back and not having a union and any means of negotiating, they would not have a job at all. So they signed the original document. And when we reported that as a success. And, I guess I'm up here today talking to you about the ethics of that because I think it was not entirely clear-cut what we did. I did that because I felt that the 2,700 people that signed that agreement needed something for their efforts, and that in the future, to fight other wars, we needed a glimmer of hope. And so I took a long view of it and, wanted to give something back to people, even if in its purest form, I think it wasn't a total victory. I think that, the gain, if you can call it that, is that they didn't lose their jobs altogether. And there was some, good maneuvering on the part of the union, but it was not, by any stretch of the imagination, a grand success, and I don't love this story. Anyway, moving on, community and criticism. There are other things that we have done that I think have happier endings. And so I'm going to try and share a few of those things with you today. I'm going to begin to delve into the idea of community a little bit more, and what I think that means, and what I think makes it better, and the role that I see for myself as a critic. As it happened, this topic came up relatively recently on the blog, sometime last year, and it actually came up in classroom discussion today. So anybody who was here earlier gets the privilege of hearing this story twice, which should be awesome for all of you guys. So anyway, over the years, I have spent a lot of time advocating for equal gender representation in the art world. And this is a particular problem in the field of net art. And it's a problem because there are fewer women participants, but the culture itself is also very dude-centric. And so while I realize that not all shows are going to have an equal number of men and women, some will have more men, others will have more women, I do think that there is a problem that needs to be addressed when there are no women in the show that I see. And that was something that I was seeing a lot of during this particular month. So I did a bunch of reporting, and I wrote a post, as you can see, titled "Enough with the Dude-Centric Art Shows." And that created quite a ruckus. You can see the number of Facebook likes and retweets and all the rest. The comment section was out of control. And there was a lot of comments on Facebook that no longer exist because people have deleted them, thankfully. There was a lot of disagreement about how gender representation should be tackled. So I was going to read something from the comment section that I thought was sort of relevant and caused me to sort of hash out my feelings about communities as a result, and my role as a critic. Paddy, your role as an art critic should be to critique art, not polarize the members of marginalized communities. Why don't you focus on writing art critique, which offers some insight to help a movement form and grow? Now, I think that this is a reasonable position. It's not the one that I share, but I think it's totally reasonable to say something like that, particularly with a post that had so many comments and so many people were upset and, you know, rightly or wrongly felt attacked, or, you know, that you know, men were the terrible things on the earth and we want to get rid of them. I never wrote that, by the way, but this there was that interpretation. So anyway, just to read the response to that. Difference is how we work problems out. We debate, we talk about issues that are important to us, and based on those conversations, we respond in a way that we think will best benefit the profession we work in. Every time a post about gender representation gets written in the field, someone complains about how we're not actually talking about what matters, art. Well, that's bullshit. Art isn't made in isolation somewhere only to be birthed into the wild by some daring curator or writer. Art and exhibitions and writing, it all grows out of a community, so we damn well better make sure ours is healthy. Personally, I think one of the best ways to make sure that our shows represent to make sure that this happens is to make sure that our shows represent the diversity of voices out there. When that's not happening, it's our job as a community to talk about how to fix those problems. And that's very much what I thought this post was doing. And I think, you know, one way that we can do that, I actually have this written out here, but it was in a comment somewhere else, is that by talking to curators about the shows we're in and expressing our concerns, if we have them, you know, we can make changes. I think the things that we often forget is that the people we're working with are people. Like, they're human beings that we can have conversations with, and we should have conversations with them, because when we do, we learn about their position on things. And that's really empowering. So if you think there are not enough women in a show, if you think there are not enough men in the show, you can talk to the curator about that. And I would wager that they would be excited to get the feedback because it could mean a better show. Like, for me, I'm always excited when somebody says to me, you know, I think, well, not excited, petrified, but when somebody says, you know, I think your criticism could be better and here's how. Like, here's what I think you missed. That's a conversation I want to have because I want to be better. And I think that people want to be better at what they do, so when you have a conversation with them and you tell them that you think, like, this could be improved in X, Y way, or, like, you're really happy about X and Y, like, these things are great. It's great to have conversations, and that's, like, that's part of, like, what it means to build a better community. Building a better community means talking to each other. So now, the ethics of collaboration. One of the things that happened to us recently was Sandy hit. That was not a good time for a lot of people in New York. So this is, I have a few slides to just sort of demonstrate bad things, which I'm sure you're aware happened, but, you know, to relive some of those terrible memories. Here we go again. So Sandy, this is a car stuck in some sand. It's terrible. This was a 20 by 200 and Time collaboration where they released editions to benefit the Hurricane Sandy victims. And I thought this was a really great benefit edition because a lot of people really wanted to give, and this is an easy way to do it, and you get art out of it. You get something that helps you think about the event. So it also helps develop our language about art. You know, I think by the same time, I think it's important that we remember that 20 by 200 and Time magazine aren't doing this totally out of the goodness of their heart, although that's also why they're doing it. Like, they get some publicity out of this. They get new customers. And that is fine. This is part of what happens when we collaborate. This is Chelsea. Another terrible shot. This is Jane's carousel in Dumbo. This was an Instagram shot. I wanted to just sort of linger on this slide for a little bit because this is in Dumbo. Excuse me. And in Dumbo, the flooding was really bad. And I think that this slide gives an indication of just how bad it was. And Macmillan, which is an organization very dear to my heart, is situated in Dumbo. And they, you know, they have very little resources. They're an organization that we share a lot in common with because, you know, for the people who read Art City regularly here, you'll know that we cover a lot of sort of mainstream events like art fairs and the Venice Biennale and these sorts of things. But we also make a very big point of trumpeting under-known, under-recognized artists. So if you guys, I think this came up in a class today, the Hennessy Youngman Art Thoughts. The first blog that showed Art Thoughts was Art City. And, you know, they would have, Hennessy obviously would have been famous with or without Art City's support, but, like, that's exactly what we do. You know, we find people who are underknown and who we think have talent, and we try to shed light on them. And I think that that's what Macmillan does, too. And, you know, they suffered $400,000 worth in damages, and that's terrible. And, you know, before the hurricane had happened, their program had already taken a hit, so they were cutting back staff hours. So this was absolutely terrible, terrible news. And as it turns out, Art City had semi-relationship with this Macmillan residency program because I'd been there. I'd been invited to do some studio visits. And we'd actually talked about the possibility of doing a benefit in their space, although we'd ultimately discarded that. But I wanted to talk about this because, of course, in the end, what we did is we had been planning the Arfag City Wienerfest and fundraiser, which is absolutely as funny as you think it is. It was amazing. But we had to postpone it because of Sandy, and it really did not feel right for us to try and raise money without, just for ourselves, although, you know, we lose something. We lost our benefit when Sandy hit and nobody could get to it. So, you know, but like, you know, somebody who has suffered $400,000 worth of damage is suffering a lot worse than we are, and we wanted to be able to do something. So we partnered with them, in a sense. I mean, I wrote them, I think, the second day of the hurricane, and I said, look, I know you guys are really suffering. What do you think of us adding you to our benefit? And so that's what we did. And there are so many things wrong with this picture, and I'm okay with all of them. In any event, we raised, we had the goal of raising $5,000 for Macmillan, and we did that. And, you know, I think there are some concerns that we had, both in terms of, like, will we be seen as somebody who is taking advantage of a particular situation so that we can do something for ourselves, and also, like, what does it mean for an independent blog to raise money specifically for an organization that they might review? And, you know, I have to tell you that I have written none of this out. Like, I don't have a scripted answer. There isn't one. I think what it means is that when we do talk about them, we always talk about our connection to them, that we did this for them, that we have a relationship, and that is something that you should know when you read as a reader. And so that's what we will do. But in my estimation, the importance of doing something for a part of the community that I felt was really essential to making it be a better, more robust community far outweighed, you know, a little disclaimer that we might have to write on the blog. So anyway, so then we had this Wienerfest. And there's a lot of sort of stories about the giant hot dog ejaculating mustard on the wall that I won't totally get into unless somebody asks me after the fact. But we also spent a bunch of time, sort of last minute, getting a blinged out hot dog cart that also doubled as a DJ booth. And so we had a DJ come in and perform on this thing. And also, so we found this particular cart very last minute. We were at NADA, which was a week before the actual benefit. So we spotted the hot dog cart, and we were like, this has to come to New York City. So that involved me talking to Ford, which was a sponsor of the hot dog cart, and a lot of other people doing an immense amount of emailing to make sure that this could happen, and actually sending 2 staff members, flying them out to Florida so that they could transport the cart on a U-Haul back to Postmasters so that we could have something bling while we had this fundraiser for ourselves in Macmillan. But it turns out that the guy who made this cart, idiom, also had a connection with Takeru Kobayashi. How many of you know who Takeru Kobayashi is? Okay, time to learn. He is the world champion of hot dog eating. And he is very skinny. And if you Google his name, the first thing that will come up, or one of the first things, is him competitive eating against a grizzly bear, which he won. So my week was spent talking to Kobayashi's agents about how he really needed to do a performance at ArtFag City, and that this performance would benefit Smackmillan specifically, and that no, we did brand this around eating dicks, but Kobayashi will not be perceived as eating dicks. We also have this slow motion video of him not eating dicks. So yes, eating hot dogs, competitive eating hot dogs in slow motion is just as disgusting as watching it in fast motion. Kobayashi, for the record, ate 12 hot dogs in 1 minute. That's one hot dog every 6 seconds. And he did that at the RFAG City Wiener Fest. So I was very excited about this, and I'm very happy that we were able to make that happen. In any event, the last issue I wanted to tackle is it's one that comes up a lot, and I'm sure that I came up actually in the class today too, and that's provincialism. And that is a very large issue, I think, for people, for me as a blogger in New York who suffers from my own kind of sort of myopic focus on New York. Although I'm lucky enough to be flown around different places to give lectures like this, so I have perhaps a larger sort of understanding of the scene than I think a lot of people. But also I think when I go places, I find that there are a lot of people who are similarly unaware of the world outside them. And so it's something that I think that the internet should be able to fix or help with, but thus far has not done a very good job with that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, and this is sort of a circuitous route to getting there, is Pete Wells, who has nothing to do with art. He's a food writer for the New York Times. He's the restaurant critic, and he spent a lot of time on his Twitter account after Sandy, just dedicating his Twitter to talking about restaurants that were suffering thanks to Sandy, and people that you could go and be a patron of. And I thought that that was a really kind of great way of using such a large platform, because Pete, I mean, he's a fantastic critic, but just by virtue of his position, like, people listen to him no matter what he says. So it's a great platform, and I feel like he's using it for good, and that makes me very happy. Interestingly, the other thing he does is he I feel anyway, although he is the New York Times dining critic and focuses on dining in New York, he considers Staten Island part of New York, which is great because it is. And so anyway, so he reviewed a Sri Lankan restaurant recently, and I thought this was sort of an interesting thing to do. And one of the first responses to his review was, "Dear Pete Wells, there are restaurants in Manhattan, you know, good ones. You should review some of them." So anyway, I used this because I thought it was a pretty good example of provincialism even within New York. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody in Tribeca who's like, look, you're only spending time on the Upper West Side. Like, you should be, you know, reviewing restaurants more in Tribeca. And in fact, they'd be correct because Tribeca restaurants are a little bit better. But still, you know, you get the point here. So it's something that we strive to fight against. And I think that for me, it's very much human nature. I mean, for me personally, and I'm just talking about my own personal experience, the way that I learn things is through experience, and that's sort of, I'm not like a super, you know, great researcher. I wish I were, but I'm not. The way that I learn things is through going there and experiencing them. So one of the things that we've introduced recently is we went to X series. And this is perhaps a bad example because we went to Chelsea. It's just in New York, and it's about as New York as you can get. But, you know, we don't like everything we see. And the format that we have when we use these things, yes, I believe there's a joke right at the very beginning of this particular review. But it was, I believe it too, that show was not a good show for genitals. All right, I'm going to wrap up pretty soon. But in any event, what we're doing, because as I mentioned earlier, RFAG City is a sponsored nonprofit, and we're transitioning to a nonprofit. And as we transition, one of the core goals that we have that's part of our mission is expanding and celebrating criticism outside of New York as a center. So when we will not just go to Chelsea, we will not just go to the Lower East Side or Bushwick, we're going to Toronto. So we're going to do a series that is that. We're going to Baltimore. We're going to go to Venice. That's a little more traditional, I admit. The Venice Biennale is something that everybody goes to, but we're going to do it. And we're going to talk about it in that sort of conversational format. And we're going to go to New Orleans. And that's a pretty big deal for us. We have a grant from the Joan Mitchell Foundation, and they have a new educational program in New Orleans. So we're working in partnership to go there. And we're also working with Art Prize in Grand Rapids to go up there. And, you know, in case you guys aren't sure of what you're looking at, that is indeed the Loch Ness Monster art piece in the river. And that's part of the wondrous stuff that Art Prize has to offer. And I personally believe that you can, I've been to Grand Rapids once to see Art Prize, and it is a phenomenon, and I do not like almost all of the art there, and that is fine. You know, I think it is important for us to go there and really experience what it is for the people in that center. And I say that because communities are very different, and what communities get out of the particular events that they launch are very different. And you really can't understand that from afar. You have to go see it in person. And so that's what we're going to be doing for the rest of the year in addition to our regular coverage. And I'm really excited about it. And that wraps up my presentation on ethics and criticism. Does anybody have any questions?
Questions? Hi, Patty. I'm wondering how you feel the relationships being formed online and sort of the expansion of the community conversation online is affecting and impacting art criticism sort of now and into the future.
Art criticism or art?
Art criticism or art critics, I guess you could go either way.
Well, I mean, I think for one thing, it makes the art critics that I know, at least the younger ones, are perhaps less. They tend to investigate Foucault a little bit less, and they tend to look at, I hope anyway, they tend to look at the art a little bit more. I think that the conversation is not necessarily elevated, but understandable a little bit more. And so I mean, I think we have the same problems we've always had. Like, talking about art is very, very difficult. So we don't do it sometimes, and we'll talk about the art world or we'll talk about something else because that's easier. And that doesn't go away. But I do think that there's, online art criticism and conversation has definitely opened that up a little bit. And one of the ways, I think the most practical ways that we see this is that because we can just simply embed an image or a video into a blog, and we can do that as many times as we feel is necessary to get our point across, people have the ability to make up their mind on their own a little bit better, and they also have the ability to respond and really sort of invest the time if they have it in those videos. I mean, I think that's sort of contrasted by how much time any of us have, which appears to be diminishing. So it's a fight.
Okay, given all the art that's available to see in New York and now the rest of the country, how do you decide what you're going to write about? For the We Went To series, usually we have a checklist. So if we have reviewed one gallery recently, or like even within the last 6 months, and it's been checked off, it's not going to get a look until we've done other galleries. There are also galleries that I don't like and I won't review for that reason. So some of that comes down to personal taste. Things around the country, a lot of that at this point is maybe not as directed as I would like it to be. So like, for example, I know a little bit more about Denver because I've been here, and you guys chose to bring me out, and I feel very flattered and privileged to be here. But I don't know that I would have found you on my own, and I don't mean that as a slight or anything. I just mean that, like, because of where I'm at, like, that's just sort of the reality of it. And I think also people who are more inclined to do an enormous amount of research would, find things differently than I do. A lot of the way that I find things is just, the way that most people do. Like, I meet somebody who I like and I respect their opinion, and then they tell me to see something, and then I do.
One thing that really surprised me was on the page that was discussing a number of men versus women in the ArtNet. One of the main persons that was in the first two paragraphs, I don't know if anybody noticed.
I forgot to tell you, Patty.
But that was Sterling Crispin, recent RMCAD graduate.
I heard he made quite a stir here when he was here.
But it really surprised me to see that he was so supportive of an all-male show. I couldn't quite picture that. But an interesting thing about Sterling is Sterling and I drove to Grand Rapids and went to the first art prize. And we did an installation there, which was good, but didn't win the $250,000 first prize. and there's a $100,000 second prize and a $50,000 third prize. You know about the big prize money.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's even larger now. I think they increased the cash pot, so.
So this is a very half-baked idea, but one thing I saw a few years ago was a map of the internet. They'd apparently sent some robots through the internet and mapped it out. Then they mapped it out a few years later, and it had grown vastly more dense. And it seems to me that the online art world is rapidly increasing in density, and one wonders how one can find their way around. And I kind of asked you some questions about this today, but I'm wondering, is there such a thing, or is there or do you think there might be a possibility of a map of the art online?
I don't know why anyone would want one.
I would.
I mean, I think that I mentioned this earlier, that we released an app earlier this year that's for Android only, so I cannot yet use my own app, which is very annoying. But for those of you who can, there's an RSS feed for all the blogs that we deem important that can help you sort of get a gauge of what's out there, which is very useful. I think in addition to that, I mean, I believe that simply being active on one social network is probably enough. Like, if you are active on Facebook, Facebook is used by people who are typically a little bit older, like sharing posts and like looking at what your friends are posting. You can follow a few people who are pretty active and get a pretty good gauge. I mean, you can also, if you are of the Twitter inclination, you can follow, a number of people on Twitter. All people do all day on Twitter is talk to each other and share links. So, and I'm definitely at the stage now where I spend a lot less time with my RSS feed and a lot more time with people who share links that I tend to like. And that can happen because of my profession. I have to keep track of Tumblr and Twitter and Facebook. So I'm on a lot of these things, probably more than I would like. But it's a good way to sort of keep your pulse on things. But I don't know that a map would even be that that useful, because, I mean, I guess the question is, what exactly are you mapping? Like,
to try to avoid the provincialism, one would like to know what is happening in the rest of the world. Like, I stumbled across something recently that I found extremely fascinating. It was, I think it was called Water Pod. It was a barge with geodesic domes on it and solar collectors and artists living on the barge going around Manhattan. Do you know about the Water Pod?
I don't, actually.
Do you know who Mary Mattingly is?
No.
Anyway, this was extremely interesting.
Wow, what
to
a
me.
failure.
That's
terrible for an art critic.
And so I did accidentally stumble across WaterPod, but I wish there was a way that I could go out and try to find these things.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is really just like, a lot of it is just kind of following people who throw out a lot of links that you tend to like. I don't think that there's a tried and true method of like, this blog always has coverage of art outside of New York, but all over the country. There isn't really one like that. And I don't know when it's going to happen. I mean, I guess the closest example to that might be Hyperallergic, because they have a number of contributors in different parts of the United States. So they're a pretty reliable read.
I think the most useful contribution to that comment might be look at geotagging as a principal part of the way that you blog, so that when you do sort of exit that bubble, that the geotags speak for you. And I think that when you do geotagging inside of blog posts and things like that, it ends up creating a larger sphere of influence. And I think that's what he was getting at, is like the map in a traditional sense may not be precisely where he was going with it, but the idea of geotagging is pretty important, and it also adds to the data.
That makes sense.
Oh, what's geotagging? Well, it's not just what, but where it is, you know? The idea of embedding images and texts with not just what it is and what we have to say, but where we set it and who we set it with, it's a more complete data set. And from that more complete data set, we can do more forensics on what else is going on in that place. So we can get a sort of a sense of the vibrancy of the conversation. And it's being done in a lot of different net-based environments where geotagging is a norm. And it's also part of a data mining set that can become part of a public commons scenario where people can create more data and more information based on more tags, basically.
I mean, I think the journalism sort of version of that is, you know, when you read a post and like, or an article, and like the first thing you see is where it was written. So it'll say like Berlin, and then you start reading the story. But in this case, you know, you'll have a tag that's specific as well.
I wonder if you could talk about, I mean, when we think back to the days of Lucy Lepard, when she was one of the first women critics in a very male-dominated world. Can you talk about like what's the critics world like now? Do you have camaraderie with a lot of critics? Is there antagonism? I mean, there's always going to be antagonism, I know that, but what's your sense of what the critics world is now?
Well, I mean, I guess I would begin by saying that, and this is, I have no idea why this is the case, but Artifact City traditionally has employed or had for interns, female interns. And that's just because of who has responded to the calls. But right now, there are 5 people at Artifact City. And the critics are almost all women. So it's me, Karina Kirsch, and Whitney Kimball. And then Will Brand is an editor and does some, he contributes as well, but mostly does tech work. So this is probably the most un-PC thing to admit, but within the office we have like Will Brand as the Charlie, and he's got his angels. So it's terrible, but that's the way it is. But I mean, outside of that, I mean, I think there are like sort of spats and things like that. Like, I didn't really want to get too far into that because the kind of like tit for tat, like you didn't link to me, you have this policy of only like linking to, you know, people who you consider major, gets a little tedious and is sort of interesting to people in the business of media, but like once you start talking about it, becomes, I don't know, like just like it's kind of shitty conversation, honestly. But as far as to sort of go further on the women side of things.
Just the number of critics. Like I'm thinking about, you know, how has that world expanded? You know, obviously the internet has helped expand it, but what's your sense? Because it was such a small group, and everybody looked to Greenberg, and everybody looked, you know, to these people, and it doesn't seem like that's the sense of it anymore. So I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. I mean, like, I just remember like Irving Sandler's call for like, you know, the state of criticism is in crisis, and like, you know, Broken Rail has like, 30 some odd responses from critics, across the nation about like how terrible the state of criticism is. And I just like, there's a lot of us, yeah, but I still feel like, I mean, how many of us are really doing good work? Like, there's just so, like, art criticism, like, you only remember 2 people a century because it's really hard. Like, nobody, like, there aren't very many people good at it for that reason. And that, I think, like, that percentage remains the same. Like, I think the funny thing about the fine art world is that we're all in this, like, just scraping for this, like, shred of recognition that, like, will be important, like, years down the road, because, like, maybe it doesn't matter if we make that much money now, but, like, in the future, like, history will remember us. And I just want to get away from that. I think it's a really bad model, because what happens is that it allows people to be exploited. And we saw that in Sotheby's, and you can make these, excuses about why it's okay to, like, not support your friends and your colleagues, because in the end, like, the history book is going to remember you or somebody else. And, like, really the only thing you have right now is community. And, like, you have to treat it well. I mean, that's a divergence. I diverged from your original question, but.
So that was a great transition I'm curious to know about the choice to shift from for-profit to the nonprofit status, and I'm also would love to kind of dig a little bit into maybe is the nonprofit status a way in which you can speak more freely and support the community more authentically, rather than be possibly pulled by, advertisers, and then question number 2, which is keeping community in mind. How bitchy do you like to get in your criticism?
Well, I guess to begin, I think with the first question first, the transition to nonprofit from for-profit is, in one way, just sort of a different business model. So I think when we call it a for-profit, that assumes that Art City was making money at some point. So that was never really the case. So when I decided to transition to this model, it wasn't like, the goal wasn't like, this will make me more independent. And, I think if I were a better PR person, I might talk to you about how independent blogs have all this power, and of course they do, but, like, I think every model has its conflicts. We still have advertising, and that's fine for me. Like, I talk to Viken, who manages our ads. He does Nectar ads, and he does a brilliant job, and I never have to, I never field anything from him that's like, can you write about this, these shows because we have this sponsor, or can you not say something negative because we have this sponsor? It's never like that. We write specific sponsored posts that are labeled as such, and everybody knows they're an ad, which is why nobody clicks through them, and that's great for advertising. But, that's sort of a separate program. But I think for us, what I thought about was okay, what do I have to do to produce the amount of content I need to produce a for-profit blog? And I thought about what I was doing and what I would need to do to get there. And I thought, this just isn't for me. I don't think that, I read all the for-profit blogs all the time, and I hate to say it, but I don't like half the shit on them, because I know it's just some regurgitated press release, or I know that the content has been
exist specifically because they need content. It just like was not the model for me, and it made me it gave me the willies every time I tried to do it, and I was terrible at it. And you know, when I started working with Will Brand, you know, it was just such a fantastic experience for me, because one of the things that was happening before I started working with him was that I would push content out there that didn't deserve to be out there. It wasn't thought out well enough. And he always demanded, and it stressed me out, I hated it. You know, he always demanded that the stuff be, like, go out at a certain level, at the level that I wanted it out in the first place. So we made very good partners kind of immediately. But the nonprofit world, like it has its own, you know, it has its own caveats. Like I have to spend, I don't really know how to do this yet. Like I'm learning how to schmooze with rich people. So far, I'm not that bad at it, but like we'll see, you know. It's all like, it's kind of new stuff. Like I have to learn, you know, how to manage sponsorships and grants, and that's a role for me that's kind of different, because I'm used to just focusing on the writing of the blog. And, you know, running a business is a different thing. And I'm happy to do that, because in the larger sense, I feel like I can give back to the community more, you know, as a group, as a collective, which is really the way that the writers at Artifact City work, than as an individual. And that makes me, you know, exceptionally happy. And to answer your second question about how bitchy do I like to get, I personally never consider anything I say all that bitchy, which may be why I've made some mistakes in the past. So, you know, I can be a little harsh, and you know, we have editors on the blog, but really, if I don't like something and I think that it's lazy or just not well thought out, I also don't think that I'm doing anybody favors by pulling my punches. And that's another tenet that, for better or for worse, Artifact City has been built upon, and it's why people love us, and it's why they hate us, and they're right both times.
I'd like to thank you all for coming out tonight, and thank you, Paddy. And I'd like to remind you the culmination of our spring series, Ethics and Practice Approaches to the Contemporary, will be Thursday, March 7th, with Simon Critchley and his talk, Contemporary Art is an Easy Thing to Hate. Thank you again, Paddy, very much for coming.
Thanks to everyone.